Well, welcome everyone to today's CGHE webinar. And our topic today is about Ukraine, higher education in Ukraine, past, present, and future. And we have an expert with us from Ukraine who's currently working in the UK, Nadiya Ivanenko. Nadiya has worked as an associate professor at the Germanic Languages and Teaching Methodology Department at Central Ukrainian State University. She's got a track record of a series of international projects, and she's a well-published scholar. Her expertise is language, but she works on internationalization and on higher education, and it's in that latter role, I think, that she's going to be talking to us today. Now, Nadiya, it's a great pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you, Simon, for this nice introduction. Yeah, can I share my slides on the screen, right? Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, thank you. Well, today I'm going to speak about the present state of higher education in Ukraine, and I will give a short overview about the past development, and then I will mostly focus on modern reform of the higher education system and current challenges of higher education in Ukraine. While Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, it was one of the most developed regions. The tremendous growth of its economy demanded a large number of highly qualified specialists for implementation of scientific research. The universities made available highly qualified research scholars and experts to meet the demand of growing economy. Ukrainian scientists became pioneers in IT, airspace technologies, welding, and so on. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine evolved as an independent nation. Soon, new perspectives for Ukrainian higher education opened. Ukraine became one of the topmost destinations for higher study in Europe. Before the invasion in February 2022, students from Asia, Africa, China, India, and Latin America studied medicine and engineering in Ukraine. The vast majority studied in medical universities, as it was much cheaper for them than in Europe. In the 1990s, there were major changes in the national system of education. The changes in structure and content of education became inevitable as the result of the development of new marketing thoughts. The labor market also demanded new skill standards. Management, marketing, law, financing, and computer engineering were among top priorities. Foreign languages such as English, German, French, and Spanish became main part of the curriculum. In 2005, Ukraine joined the Bologna process as an initial step to the integration of Ukrainian higher education into the European higher education area. The higher education system in Ukraine started undergoing major reform, especially intensively in 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity and the election of a new government. One of the first pieces of legislation was the law on higher education, introducing significant reforms. Two factors are particularly important in the reform process. Firstly, there is the part played by the sector itself, as Ukrainians' new law represents a unique case where a legal act was written not by politicians, but rather was composed, debated, modified as a result of compromise, and finalized, and then lobbied by higher education professionals and students. The second factor, and the one that provided the window of opportunity for reform, is the political context of Ukraine. Education was high on the new government's agenda, with higher education prioritized as one of the key systems able to spearhead Ukraine's integration into Europe. Before the reform, the higher education system in Ukraine was largely a legacy of the post-Soviet era. The law highlighted higher education reform and stronger levels of English in the university system as major priorities. The Ministry of Education set out an agenda of drastically reducing the number of universities from more than 800 and of introducing new legislation to combat the problems in Ukrainian higher education, most notably their inefficient use of funds, corruption, international isolation, and improving quality. This would have ended the system of central ministry control, replacing it with such greater financial, academic, and administrative autonomy for universities. The law on higher education. It is important to know that the provisions of this law are underpinned by a democratic and pro-European agenda. Key provisions of the law are defining the levels, degrees, and qualifications of higher education related to a national qualifications framework. Certification awarded to graduates include a diploma supplement produced according to European standards. Establishing higher education activity standards, setting out minimum requirements for staffing, courseware, physical infrastructure, information resources. Standards specify the number of ECTS credits required for the degrees, graduate competencies, learning outcomes, and entry requirements. These apply to all public, private, and research institutions. Management of the higher education sector. The functions of the Ministry of Education and Science are primarily concerned with setting and implementation national strategy and frameworks rather than the day-to-day operations of higher education institutions. Quality assurance. Establishing a dual system of internal and external quality assurance, higher education establishments are responsible for quality assurance within the institution, while external quality assurance is managed by a new National Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. The agency ensures the effectiveness of higher education institutions' processes and procedures. It ensures publicly available criteria for decision-making in line with standards and guidelines recognized for the European higher education area. Higher education institutions are autonomous and self-governing, managing their academic and day-to-day operations, as well as research, teaching, and developing students' abilities. Higher education institutions should build human capital to ensure Ukraine's social and economic development, spread knowledge among the population, and build international cooperation. Heads of higher education institutions manage all aspects of the institutions: financial and business operations, structure and staffing, performance, the healthy lifestyle of students, and ensuring open and effective public monitoring of the higher education establishments. Heads are accountable for their institution's education, research, and innovation activities, as well as financial and business performance. Heads are elected for a 5-year period by secret ballot. Those eligible to vote are all members of the teaching, academic, and research staff, representatives of other staff members, and elected representatives of students. Democratic and collegial governance structures are established in all higher education establishments: academic council, supervisory board, working and advisory bodies, and general assembly. Students are given participation in the management of higher education establishments at a number of levels. Scientific research and development and innovation activity at higher education establishments. The law set out the aim of making some effective use of resources in the development of and implementation of priority research programs through integration of higher education institutions and the National Academies of Science. A main area is ensuring that young researchers, graduate students, and doctoral candidates in universities are directly involved in the research of academies. Now let's speak more about the progress of the reform and implementation of this law. Passing of the law was only the first step. This is being followed up by a long process of implementation over several years, requiring a joint effort by the Ministry of Education and Science, higher education institutions, and other government ministries. In reality, there were and still there are significant challenges in implementation, arising out of the long-established nature of the post-Soviet higher education system, but also from the continued war conflict in Ukraine's eastern region and now Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine. In the years following Ukraine's independence, the education sector accumulated numerous problems, including a fall in the quality of education, an ineffective centralized system of control and financing, corruption, unequal access to quality education, a drop in the knowledge and skills of graduates, outdated teaching methods, and isolation from new developments outside Ukraine. Reform in the sector was absolutely necessary to ensure that the education system corresponds to the needs of a modern economy and promotes Ukraine's integration into international scientific activities. The goals of this reform were quality education and quality opportunity. The vision and scale of change inevitably challenged and threatened many established players and interests, meaning that reform would not be achieved easily or without resistance. The war conflict in Donbas region added a further critical dimension. While the war continued, it severely limited government funding available for higher education reform. It also meant that immediate priority had to be given to managing the severe disruptions of the universities in the war zone. In 2014, about 8,000 students sought transfers to universities outside the Donbas region. Higher education institutions were also seeking evacuation, and by August 2015, the ministry had evacuated from Donbas region 16 universities and 10 research institutes. The war in the eastern part of Ukraine also had other impacts on the sector. For example, Euromaidan turned many students into activists, and rectors of universities reported that students were dropping out of classes to join the fighting in Donbas region. Sadly, many of students were killed there. The competitiveness of a state in the global market and its economic development are directly dependent on the quality of higher education. Nowadays, there are many controversial opinions concerning the current state of Ukrainian higher education and the main tendencies of its development. In my study, I tried to identify those which seem to be the key ones from my point of view. The first one is structural reform of the higher education system. At present, in Ukraine, there is a crisis of elite higher education, and there is a transition of universal higher education with a low level of student selection, more than 50% of their age group. Due to mass accessibility, about 85% of Ukrainian school leavers enter higher education institutions immediately after finishing schools. Higher education in the country is losing its prestige. According to the experts of the Independent Analytical Center Ukrainian Institute for Future, the system of higher education in Ukraine can be characterized as mass higher education without clearly identified quality leaders in research categories, with weak internalization and an almost complete lack of effective connection with the labor market and high-tech business. The 30 years following the breakup of the Soviet Union saw a huge explosion of universities with large numbers of local institutions being set up. Abuses of the system became widespread. More students meant more money. Student numbers tripled, and many unqualified students obtained university degrees. Ukraine ended up with one of the highest higher education participation rates in the world, with 70% of 18-year-olds enrolling in higher education. That is 1.7 million students in a country of more than 40 million people, before the war. The new government tried to optimize the system, and under the new law, accreditation has been withdrawn from many institutions on the grounds of low quality. So we can state that over the last decade, as you can see from the screen, the number of higher education institutions in Ukraine has decreased more than a third. There were 802 higher educational establishments in Ukraine. Now, only some 270 remained, the majority of which are state-funded. Eventually, the aim is to have no more than 100 higher educational institutions. In total, Ministry of Statistics data cited on the National Office Erasmus Plus leaflet shows that as of the beginning of 2021-22 academic year, there were approximately 1.1 million university students. 76,000 students were foreign students. At the beginning of this year, there were approximately, this academic year, I mean, there were approximately 1 million university students. The regional distribution of applicants is as follows. Almost a quarter of students study in the city of Kyiv, 24%, and regions, the city of which are university hubs. And on the screen you can see that Kyiv city is contain the biggest number of students, and then there are 4 big university cities hubs. We call them city hubs. Yeah, Dnipro region, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Lviv, and Odessa. The next point, the next challenge is institutional autonomy and leadership. Redefining the functions of the ministry and the universities, the new law provides for institutional autonomy and self-governance. There are significant challenges here. Autonomy is not widely understood across the sector. In particular, their accompanying responsibilities and accountabilities and the scale of the democratic structures and systems needed by the higher education institutions to implement it. Democratization of institutional management and governance envisages devolved and distributed leadership in which rectors, staff, and students have defined roles and responsibilities. The levels of readiness and competence of many rectors is a challenge. Attitudes, knowledge, and skills are rooted in the post-Soviet era, where management took the form of dictatorship from the ministry. The third challenge, financial reform. The new law provided that financial reforms would take effect in January 2016. One aspect of this is the funding model for student places, and the ministry was actively investigating options and looking at the experience of other countries. The issue of financial autonomy for universities, however, poses a huge challenge. While fighting continued in Ukraine's eastern regions, the Ministry of Finance retained strong central control of money. Yet, even without the fighting, expectations were that the ministry may prove extremely resistant of ceding financial autonomy to universities. Until recently, the retention of all university monies in the treasury caused considerable problems with European and partnership grants. Once in the treasury, these become part of the state reserves and were not automatically available for universities' use. This issue has now been resolved, with university being allowed in future to deposit monies from grants and earnings in one of the 3 state banks rather than the treasury. Next challenge is a quality challenge. Dynamic changes in society, the COVID-19 pandemic have become a new challenge for the educational system in Ukraine and make it necessary to master modern methods of teaching and organizing the educational process using remote technologies. As you can see in the screen, the majority of teachers in the survey said that they do use technology in their teaching. However, a lower number reported students being able to access the internet in the classroom, and these surveys were made before the war. Students both enjoyed and believed they had learned most when engaged in interactive learning and gave examples of group work, projects, case studies, and creative work. They also appreciated well-prepared visual aids using online platforms, humor, and enthusiasm for the subject. On the next slide, you can see that although there is a wide range of assessment methods used by the teachers, the majority of teachers assess students' learning through traditional exams, oral presentations, and individual projects. As well as tackling the quality and quantity and low quality of many of the previous higher education institutions, the law aims to build a rigorous national quality assurance system aligned to European and international standards, in which quality is assured through a dual process of internal and external quality assurance. In Ukraine, the new National Agency for Quality Assurance in Higher Education started functioning. This is a completely new procedure for accreditation of educational and professional curricula, which has already brought its positive results, ensuring the objectivity and transparency of the very process of its implementation. Fifth challenge, integration of higher education and research. Currently, there is still a Soviet-era legacy divide between research and education, with teaching being carried out mainly in the universities and research in the National Academy of Science and the 6 sectorial National Academies of Science. The first level research degree is Doctor of Philosophy, and the second level Doctor of Science. The major proportion of research funding is allocated to the academies, 93%, while the majority of PhD holders, about 70%, work in the universities. The new law envisages integration between research carried out in the universities and the academies, so making better use of financial, physical, and human resources, and potentially increasing Ukraine's competitiveness in the European and global research areas. It also aims to increase the level of research in universities, as well the amount of research-based teaching. Regardless of the arguments around integration, the ministry wrote, remain committed to more research being done in the universities, and they wrote the following: we must bring research and development back to universities, because higher education cannot exist without research, and vice versa. True universities must not only teach and issue degrees, but also carry out academic research. Next challenge is higher education links to the labor market. One of the significant deficiencies in the higher education system is its disconnection from the labor market. Ukrainian students are not studying the subjects their country really needs. Around 70% of Ukrainian students attend university, but there is little relationship between the degrees they study and their country's economic needs. Although theoretically, Ukraine has strengths in science, technology, engineering, and math subjects, dating back its role in the Soviet aerospace industry, there is still an imbalance between large numbers of students studying law and economics, for example. The labor market has to be a key concern for higher education reform. Findings of the surveys are presented in the table on the next slide, and the survey covered skills development by asking how much teachers agreed or disagreed that the teaching in their discipline helps students develop a range of skills necessary for their future jobs and highly valued at the labor market. The next challenge is professional development of the academic staff. The 2019 proposal regulations for in-service training of teaching and academic staff includes the fundamental principle that teaching and academic staff have an obligation to improve their skills on an ongoing basis. Continuous professional development activities can include learning in Ukraine or abroad, in-service training, internships, seminars, open and distance learning. Individual plans are collated with the institutional in-service training plan. In-service training plan. Each teacher has to undertake CPD at least once every 5 years with a minimum equivalent of 6 ECTS credits, which means 180 hours. The law sets out new roles and responsibilities for academic and teaching staff at all levels. For example, teachers are expected to design and deliver new Bologna-compliant curricula, employ new interactive teaching methods, understand and use competence frameworks, monitor, assess, and give feedback to students, provide academic and personal support. There is also a range of new administrative duties and responsibilities. All of these require significant training and development. Though many university staff participated in training and development, there is little evidence of their ability to transfer learning into practice. This suggests either poor quality training providers or, which is more appropriate, lack of institutional support for change in practice. Institutionally, quality enhancement is being addressed alongside quality assurance, with some universities creating new centers for academic development or equivalent. They offer a teacher development program, including modules on curriculum design, learning outcomes, IT, teaching skills, leadership. Some universities have renewed their focus on academic development, including a recent program for doctors doctors of science, who need to develop competencies as educators, as teachers. Survey respondents were asked their views about their and other teachers' academic development needs. And the results show their following suggestions on the Contact for Teaching Excellence program. Next challenge is students' roles. Under the new law, student self-government is an intrinsic part of the democratic and public management process of the sector. Students participate at national level through membership of the National Quality Assurance Agency. Of the 25 agency members, 2 are student representatives elected by the student body. Within higher education establishments, students' representatives vote in the election of rectors, as well as being members of academic councils and working and advisory bodies. However, students have little understanding of what it means to be part of an autonomous university community. While both the ministry and the progressive universities recognize the need to empower students, they also recognize that they have yet to think through how to achieve this across the sector. Next point is integration of Ukraine into the global research and higher education area. In 2022, only 2 Ukrainian universities, Taras Shevchenko Kyiv National University and Karazin Kharkiv National University, were in the top 500 places in the World League tables. While some of the major universities have numerous bilateral agreements and research partnerships, levels of international engagement across the sector are relatively low when compared with universities in Europe and in the world. English language ability is a major factor here, significantly restricting academic and student mobility. One important step towards integration into the European and global research areas is that in 2015, Ukraine formally became an associate member of the Horizon 2020 program, later Horizon Europe, and Ukraine also joined Creative Europe. In 2021, the Order of the Minister of Education and Science approved the updated roadmap of Ukraine's integration into the European research area, which is a strategic document covering multilateral processes aimed at systematically supporting science and innovation. In the Euro-Atlantic vector, cooperation in the field of science and innovation is carried out through increased cooperation with international organizations. The ministry also promotes the establishment of permanent ties to expand cooperation on the basis of bilateral agreements. The list of current bilateral international agreements on scientific and technological cooperation can be seen on the screen. Next challenge is pandemic challenges. The introduction of a nationwide quarantine in connection with the COVID-19 pandemic became another challenge for the national education system, as educational institutions had to urgently reorient their work to the online mode. With the beginning of the full-scale war in February 2022, the situation became even more urgent. Under these conditions, distance education turned out to be the only possible way of organizing the educational process. In the survey that was made before the beginning of the war, just over half of survey respondents said that they use a virtual learning environment, with staff reporting their lack of IT equipment and university infrastructure as key challenges, alongside security issues, lack of training, and lack of confidence in using IT. There was a wide range of practice, however, as others had up-to-date facilities, including smart boards, and created and used a range of apps for mobile devices to use in teaching and learning. Next point is the most difficult for me to speak. It's about war challenges. Schools, universities, libraries destroyed by the aggressor, broken reform plans are far from all those consequences for education in the conditions of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine. Due to the war, educational institutions, in particular higher education institutions in Ukraine, face the following problems: survival, sometimes physical survival, adaptation to new conditions, retraining students, and appropriate quality of education. According to the Ukrainian Minister of Education, Russia's attacks on Ukraine have damaged 3,126 educational institutions and destroyed completely 333. Among them, there are 43 destroyed higher education institutions. I would like to show you just a few pictures of the destroyed higher education institutions. These are the pictures of the destroyed buildings of Karazin Kharkiv National University, a destroyed building of the Mariupol State University, 2 destroyed universities in Mykolaiv, and the destroyed Volodymyr Dal East Ukrainian National University, which is in Severodonetsk. Numerous university students, faculty, and staff have been displaced or have joined the war effort. More than 1,000 Ukrainian teachers and lecturers changed their teaching profession to the profession of a soldier with the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia. Some of them gave their lives for Ukraine already. I would like to share with you the photo of my colleague from my home university in Ukraine, in Central Ukrainian State University, with whom I worked at one faculty. He is an associate professor, Alexander Ratushniak, who immediately joined the armed forces just on the first day of the war. He is now on the front line, and we all pray for his good how it can be lives there. As the academic year continues, government officials, faculty, administrators, and students are tackling the massive challenges in keeping education going in wartime. The survival of many Ukrainian universities is now at stake due to lack of funding, displacement staff and students, and destroyed infrastructure. Besides, university lecturers try to keep online, offline, and hybrid learning, surviving challenges among which air raid sirens, blackouts, and learning in shelters are the most difficult ones. All these challenges to adjust to new learning circumstances, moving from a usual or virtual classroom to shelters, gaining knowledge how to cope with their own and student stress, demand more lecturers' effort and time. Unfortunately, online learning is also a challenge for many teachers and students because of absence of electricity for several hours a day, for example, poor internet connection, and so on. Teachers and students sometimes work just in the local shops, as you can see on the left picture, where they can find better internet access sometime, or at home during blackouts with flashlights on the head. In Ukraine, universities' revenue largely comes from tuition fees, covered by the government and the students. Both sources have been undermined by the war. The Ukrainian government is understandably directing a huge share of its resources to war efforts. Universities expect this income source to fall considerably, approximately by 2/3 or more in the present academic year. Many Ukrainian students have left the country, and the parents of many Romanian students have been displaced, often losing their jobs, so they will struggle to cover their children's university fees. The previously vibrant international student community is expected to shrink substantially in the next academic year. Overall, the higher education situation in Ukraine is highly hazardous and uncertain. But one thing is clear: the longer Ukraine's education system is hampered by Russia's war, the more human capital will be lost. Now I would like to summarize my talk. Simon, do I have enough time for this? Yeah, thank you. And first, I would like to mention some main problems of the higher education system in Ukraine, which includes the following: war disruptions and how to ensure quality education in the conditions of the war, rapid outflow of school leavers abroad, degradation of individual institutions of higher education. Gaining mass, higher education begins to lose quality and prestige. Weak interaction and trust between participants of educational process and stakeholders. A noticeable gap between the knowledge acquired while studying at a higher education institution and the possibility of using it in practice. Besides, quite often the level of professional training of graduates does not meet the demands of employers. An irrational structure of training specialists with a clear bias towards economic, managerial, and legal specialties, while technical and technological specialties, having lost demand among applicants, have significantly reduced the number of students in recent years. Complication of practical training of higher education applicants and targeted training of specialists at the request of employers. Among the positive achievements of higher education in Ukraine, in my opinion, are the following: expanding the autonomy of higher education institutions, in particular in matters of organizing of the educational process and finances; implementation of a student-centered approach to the organization of the educational process; expansion of students' opportunities in forming an individual educational trajectory. With the beginning of the work of the National Agency for Quality Assurance of Higher Education, the formation of a qualitatively new culture of higher education and transparent procedure for accreditation of curricula began. Involvement of employers and stakeholders in the organization of the educational process. Internationalization of activities of higher education institutions in the organization of training, teaching, and scientific research. Reforming postgraduate studies and training those who have obtained the third level of higher education according to European standards. That is all for today from me. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Nadiya. The power of the image, you know, your presentation was compelling, let me say, all the way through. We learned a lot. But when you started to show us pictures of the devastated universities and your colleague in uniform, then it really came home. And it was very, very powerful. I think we're all shocked and we all feel compassionately in relation to all of those involved in higher education in Ukraine. 43 destroyed higher education institutions, along with many others, and we haven't seen the end of it yet. It continues. It's a daily process, and a lot will depend on when the war can be brought to an end as to the long-term effects. Let me ask you that question about the longer term. Imagine that you're on a committee of review which will have the task of working out how to reconstruct higher education in Ukraine. Obviously, resources are constrained, always are. In this situation with so many resource needs, even more so. But there will be a good way to do this, a best way to do this perhaps. What do you think should be the priorities? What's the order of items to tick off in a reconstruction process? What are the biggest needs?
With the higher education sector, thank you for your question. Yeah, that is really very important. And I participated in several conferences and webinars, and high administrative people and people from the government started already discussing this process, because I think higher education agendas should be among the first ones in Ukraine while starting reconstructing the country. And we should think about this today, and we should start doing something even today when the war is still continuing, because everything depends on young people. They are our future, and those people who can still give good input to the development of the country. So that's why I think that everything should start with very important specialties within their higher education institutions to attract more people to come back to Ukraine, because a lot of young people found and still have opportunities to study abroad now, even, for example, without any foreign language, because some countries can accept them as students to their universities, even without their native language, country language, yeah, or for example, international English language, yeah. And so they provide them with some language courses for 3 months or for the first year of their study, and then they continue their study. And of course, they don't want to go back, and especially because it is quite dangerous there. And of course, it should be some kind of environment for highly qualified people to have this desire to come back to the country and start reconstructions in all the spheres.
Thanks, Nadiya. And you've answered my second question, which was going to be about the problem of bringing people back in. So many people have had to leave. I think you know, we have learned from the 1930s to some extent, because the terrible thing about the 1930s was that when people needed to leave Germany or needed to leave occupied Europe, they didn't have the opportunity to go anywhere so often, especially Jewish people, and they were being locked out in the rest of the world, although the world knew something of the horrors of what was occurring under the Nazis. And I think that it's different now in the sense that Ukrainian people have found opportunities to leave the country and to maintain their careers, maintain their work, study abroad in neighbouring European countries in great numbers. And that's been very, very good. But of course, as you say, it'd be important that people go back and contribute to reconstruction when the time comes. Now, let me bring in some people. And I've got on my list, first up, Ali Abruian, then Mike Ratcliffe, and then Nick Hillman. So Ali Al-Rubian, please come in now.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Nadiya, for the informative overview for what's happened in the Ukrainian, the past and the current situation. The future is optimistic, so we hope, inshallah, we will reach it at the end. And our feeling, my feeling, it was with you and your home to, inshallah, to get, inshallah, better soon, and everything will be in the past. My question is with regard to when you are talking about in the period of independence of the Soviet Union, as we know, and the population of Ukrainian that time is about more than 40 million, about 41 million in that time. And we are talking about completely different economic system and educational system, transfer from centralized to decentralized and so on, because we are going to the time for joining European Union. My question is with regard to the higher education with the labor market. You are mentioned you had the connectivity between the outcome of higher education and the labor market. As we know, there is many factors play key roles in the labor market. How can meet the requirement of a labor market by the higher education outcome? This is my first question. Another question with regard to we are talking about the quality of higher education system. What about the quality of a program of higher education? It should be based on the labor market needed and the population of the community and the independent period needed and so on. You are talking about the system, but I haven't seen a focused thing about program, because I'm really concerned about the quality of program itself, which feed at the end the quality of system itself in higher education. Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, the first question is about labor market here and how to face those needs. Yeah, during the Soviet time, it was really a different system. Yeah, and there was demand. So some industries and agriculture were rapidly developing. Yeah, and the demand was in highly qualified specialists in those spheres. Yeah. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was the tendency in Ukraine that a lot of, so the demand for law students, managerial specialties, and also a lot of them studied economics. Yeah, so the three main branches. Yeah, but there were a lot, newly established higher education establishments, like private, for example, with these new highly demanded qualifications, specializations, and they accept students sometimes on quite a low grades and so on. And most parents and students, they didn't think about their future job, for example, or where to find the job in the country, how to apply for a good job, for a very well-paid job. Yeah, and they just wanted to get this higher education degree, yeah, to get a diploma, and they were happy with that. And very often just either black market or connections of their parents helped them to find jobs. I'm not speaking even about good jobs, because anyway, if it is, for example, an international company, organization, or government structure, whatever, they always check you, and they always give you a kind of probation period, and they see whether you are a good specialist or not. And only then, so you can work for this or that company and improve your image and so on, salary and everything. Well, and many students just got their diplomas, but they still didn't get either any jobs or well-paid jobs. And many of them went, for example, to neighboring countries like Slovakia, Czechia, or Poland, just to work, you know, just like to find some jobs at labor market, but mostly those were not like highly paid jobs. For them, it was maybe more highly paid than in Ukraine, but they worked, for example, building in constructions or building roads or whatever. So I mean, physical labor, yeah. How to meet new demands? I think with that table I demonstrated for you, so that a lot of those skills, like for example, critical skill thinking or creativity or working in a team, ability of working in a team, any others. They were not, you know, just developed. They were not highly paid too the teachers in the universities. And very often teaching was just consisted only, for example, in coming, reading a lecture just from your notes, yeah, and without any interaction with the students, without making them thinking, especially during lectures, for example. During seminars, it was differently because so mostly students were speaking and the teacher was just given marks, yeah. Yeah, and those skills should be developed, and those skills which are highly evaluated, appreciated at the labor market, they should be developed during during university years, during studies at the universities, I think. Thank you. I hope I answered your question, maybe something to...
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nadiya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadiya, and thank you, Ali. I'm going to bring in two questioners now together, Nadiya, so hold until you've heard both questions. First, Mike Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Nadiya, and I think a lot of us are affected by your presentation on the state of what's happened to the Ukraine, and our sympathies are very much there, and therefore this is seems a mundane question to come back to global league tables and the positioning of the Ukrainian higher education sector. But I was struck by that piece of data about the amount of research done by the academies rather than the universities. And obviously we know that the global league tables are very concerned with the amount of research done in universities. And I wonder whether that was just a long-term issue that there was a plan in the country to try and address, because while there is that separation between the academies and the universities, they're never going to break into the upper echelons of those global league tables.
So hold your answer, Nadiya. I'll bring in Nick Hillman next. Nick?
Thank you, Simon. I'm on my phone, so I hope you can hear okay. Thank you for a brilliant presentation. I've not heard anything quite like it before, but it was very moving, and thank you. My question is really a sad question. I was very struck, depressingly so, by the response of the rectors of Russian universities to the invasion. And I wondered whether, from your perspective, you were surprised by that, whether, by their support for the Russian government, or you just thought it was always going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Well, the first question about global rates, yeah, and about this distribution between academies and, those people who taught in the universities. It is really so, and it was always so that, yeah, most people who work, and it is still happening in such a way that those people who work in their academies and these regional academies, so they mostly accumulate theoretical knowledge, but most of the funding goes directly to the Academy of Sciences, yeah, but not to the universities, for example. And so it's unfortunately, yeah, but I just wanted to give you some figures. Most of those people who have PhD degree and who sometimes are involved in big scientific research projects, so they work in universities. I mentioned the number 70% or more than 100,000 PhD holders actually. So under the new law, I should mention that universities are eligible to apply for designation as research universities, entitling them to additional research funding, which is quite good. And still integration in an area of significant challenge, while many universities still question the impact of the academy's research, arguing that evidence of impact is neither gathered nor assessed, leading academicians who have huge influence in higher education remain strongly opposed to reform. and that is very, very bad, actually. Yeah, the second question was about the reaction of most of the Russian universities and rectors. And well, you know, as a person who have been working for a long time in higher education all my life, actually, and I've been traveling a lot across the world, and I participated in different international conferences. I always understood, and now I understand the reaction. My first understanding of that was non-understanding, actually, because what scientific and research community in Ukraine expected from our Russian colleagues was like understanding and supporting peace, not war. But I think, well, with time, with months, I understood that I think for those people it is quite difficult to speak in such a country with such strong dictatorship. So that's why it is not a surprise. And I think in Ukraine, scientific research community was already ready in a kind of way for that. And because many connections with Russian universities and especially research projects and some other points, like, for example, publishing in Russian journals, were actually, so everything was actually banned by the government, by the ministry. So many scientists and researchers found their way in European universities, journals, communities, research projects, and so on. And actually, it was a good push to make this, to do this step closer to the European research community, I think. Thank you.
Thanks for the answers to both questions, Nadiya. We've just got time for a couple more voices and your response, and then we'll close. So can I bring in first Aliya Sasinbayeva, and I'm also going to bring in Natalia Rumantseva. So first, Aliya.
Hello, everybody, dear colleagues. Nadiya, thank you very much for your great and informative presentation. I hope the war will soon finish in your country, and you will reconstruct all the universities and will bring back the quality in higher education. In my country, in Kazakhstan, we are also shocked and devastated what is happening in Ukraine. I have the question about students' voice. You talked about their role, and I think probably I will talk about the past. Did students participate in the design of curriculum in higher education? And if yes, so what were the instruments, student satisfaction surveys, and maybe something else? Thank you very much for your answer.
Thanks, Aliya. Let's see if we can find Natalia. Are you there, please?
Hello. Apologies for the noise. There is a lot of background noise here. Yeah, I'm Natalia Rumiantseva. Mine was not so much a question, but a suggestion that perhaps colleagues who are on this call, and of course Nadiya specifically, would like to get together at some point and discuss possible research projects that we could undertake now whilst the war is ongoing, and how we could support the universities in, whilst the war is ongoing, and hopefully at the stage of the reconstruction, with maybe evidence gathering and planning systematic engagement of Ukrainian scholars to help them raise their research potential whilst the ministry is considering this dilemma between universities and academies of sciences. So I left my contact details in the chat, and if people are interested in forming a group like this to occasionally meet and brainstorm, that would be great. Yeah, and thank you very much, Nadiya, for your overview. It's really, really helpful.
Thanks, Natalia. And so you've got a question there, Nadiya, from Aliyah, and a comment that you might want to comment on as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalia, for your comment. And of course, yeah, I also had my email on the last slide, and you can always find my email on the Department of Education, Oxford University website as well. Yeah. Well, Aliyah, thank you for your question. Yeah. Well, so about students' participation. So yeah, the students' role now is paid much attention, and not a single election of any rector, for example, or not even a general assembly of the university staff can take place without students' participation. So they participate, well, locally in their universities, student participate in the election of rectors and also in different academic councils. But on the national level, which is quite new, I mentioned that 25 members of this National Quality Assurance Agency, of these 25 members, 2 are students' representatives, and they are elected on the national level. So also like students from different universities, like heads of the university councils, and then they elect 2 representatives to participate in this agency. If they participate, the question was, did the student participate in creating curricula? So they can only, so usually according to the new law, curricula should be advertised, so to say, on the website of the university, of the department, and of course, stakeholders should be obligatory participants of the creation of a new curriculum, for example, and students can also participate and discuss and give their comments and recommendations and so on. And besides, before creating any new curriculum or whatever, so students' voices, different surveys should be done, and so all those results should be taken into account before creating any new curriculum. That is the situation in Ukraine.
Thank you, Nadiya.
Thank you.
And thank you, Aliyah. And Nadiya, that was a wonderful webinar for us, and you really brought us into the situation, and you gave us so much to think about and so much data to work with. So I think everything has been accomplished successfully today, and of course it's an ongoing conversation. These issues, you know, don't disappear when the webinar finishes. For everyone, I think we'll continue to monitor the situation and hear your voice in relation to Ukraine. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to bring you back on as things develop a little bit further. Thank you, everyone, for attending CG webinar number 331. Thank you, Mary, for making it all happen. And I do invite you to tune in again on Thursday this week for webinar number 332, which is Brexit and UK higher education. You know the answer, don't you? ? With Ludovic, Hyman, Vasiliki, Papatsiba, and myself talking about UK higher education now 6 years after Brexit, 6.5 years. Thank you again, Nadiya, and good luck with everything as things move forward. Let's hope that we can start talking about reconstruction and not just about survival soon.
Yeah,
Bye, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.